This is the Engaged Classroom, and we'll talk about project-based strategies that will foster student ownership of learning. And I'm Karen Mazzo, and I am giving this webinar for demonstrated success. And welcome. You will see on the side of your screen, there's a control panel. So I want you guys all to know that you are currently muted. And if you need to ask a question, then there is a questions section on the control panel, which I will be monitoring. So feel free to write in a question at any time, and I will stop and ask it and answer it. Ask it out loud and then answer it. And I also wanted to draw your attention. I did attach a bunch of handouts under handouts, also in the control panel. Backward planning, a project calendar, a couple different protocols for thinking in groups, and something called the GRIT rubric. These are about a third of the handouts that I have available for you. The rest of the handouts are on the Demonstrated Success website. If you go to our website and you log in as a member, and then you go to the 2018-19 consortium and find this webinar, if you open that up, there's probably about 15 to 20 different templates and protocols, a couple of articles. There's also the PowerPoint itself and an hour-long certificate for attendance that you can use for your recertification. In addition to that, though, you will get the PowerPoint and the certificate in the email, not in the snail mail. So all that is there for you. And, you know, if you can't get into our site or you just want to contact me, feel free, and I'll have a contact slide at the end. So welcome. I am happy to be delivering this webinar today. I've been thinking about delivering this webinar for quite a while. I've been wanting to delve more into project-based learning, and I think it's really important. I want to talk about engagement a little bit and what we mean when we talk about students being engaged. It's a relationship between having their attention, definitely, and a lot of the times we can look out at our classrooms and we think we have attention, and we may or may not. And it's a combination of having their attention, but also their commitment, right? Their desire to learn more, their investment in the process. And you know that they are invested in the process when students ask for help, when they start looking beyond what you're saying to ask for more information, to do their own research, to talk to each other about whatever content you're covering. And then when they're moved to try to show their understanding of what they've studied or what they've learned. So, and it's a cycle, right? So when you introduce content in your classroom, you might see that commitment. You might see students asking for help, asking questions. They will be demonstrating their learning for that day or the next day, and they may succeed or they may fail, but with a commitment, they'll try again in the next interval and so on. So this is an ongoing engagement cycle. So I want to talk about the levels of engagement. And this person, Philip Schlechte, he was a researcher and an educator, and he wrote a bunch of books. And his most recent was called Engaging Students, and he wrote that in 2011. And I liked this visual because I feel like it breaks down what we are seeing in our classrooms, and it gives language to what we're experiencing and what kids are experiencing. So let's talk about this visual for a second. When our students are engaged, they have a high level of commitment to the activity in the classroom, and we can see them establishing eye contact. They're quiet. They will persist in the face of difficulty. They'll try harder if they're struggling. They will work with their groups. They will work harder to get along with their peers. And that's when we know that they are capable, they're set up at that point to learn at high levels. Then there's this second level underneath there, the level of strategic compliance. And I personally think that that's a lot. I have two 17-year-old kids, and I think that they spend a lot of their day in strategic compliance. So they're establishing eye contact. Yes, they're sitting at their desk. They are not very interested necessarily in what they're learning, probably 50% of the time, but they know what they need to do, and they are very interested in getting good grades. And they do what they need to do, basically. But if the grades weren't attached to it, I'm not sure that they would invest in the learning some of the time. The next one is a student that's willing to simply avoid negative consequences, right? So this student doesn't want to fail the test. This student doesn't want to be yelled at. Student doesn't want to be called out. So they meet the minimum requirements. They do their work in a sort of not a wholehearted manner. They give short answers. They one-word answers. They may not raise their hands, but they'll stay quiet and attentive, and they will learn a little bit. And then there's the retreatism, and that's when a student is disengaged, right? And we've all seen this in kids where they actively refuse to participate. And they may put their heads down, they may turn their paper over, they may put on their headphones. So it's very clear when a student is retreating. And then there's the very, very obvious rebellion, where kids are basically wreaking havoc in your classroom, and they're looking to disrupt others, and they resent what they're being asked to do. And this results over the long term, we know, in a negative attitude towards their educational path. So of the three pie charts at the bottom, we have the highly engaged classroom, and then the well-managed classroom, and the pathological classroom. And it shows you in each of these the levels of engagement that are primarily present, right? So in the highly engaged classroom, you're looking at probably 65 to 70% of kids that are in full engagement, right? There's always going to be about a quarter in strategic compliance. And then you're going to have a couple who are kind of low attention, low commitment. They're not doing school. They don't know as well how to look like they're paying attention. And then you're going to have the kids that retreat, one maybe in a typical classroom. And in a well-managed classroom, right, we have a lot of compliance. The emphasis is on compliance. Everybody is doing, or most kids are looking like they're doing what they're supposed to do. And then the pathological classroom, obviously, that's a whole different ballgame. And that happens too. I've been a part of those classrooms as well, and they've been mine. So obviously, we all would love to be working in the highly engaged classroom. And I don't know about all of you, but I certainly struggled when I was in the classroom to make that happen. So this is an interesting visual on the life of a student and their levels of engagement. And I liked it because it showed me quantitatively what I know intuitively from working K through 12 in schools all over New Hampshire and in Maine and in Connecticut. And I just see the same thing over and over again, right? So kids start when they're young. We have very high levels of engagement. And, you know, a lot of the reason for that is the learning is naturally more hands-on. And the learning is in many ways straightforward. Demonstration of mastery is more straightforward. And we tend to emphasize the skills of school more in the early grades. So we integrate, more interaction, more hands-on activities. And the kids are just naturally, they're not jaded. It's new, it's exciting. And K through 3, it's really the exceptional child who is not engaged or is disinterested in their school day. It might be a student who has some attentional issues and goes off in his head, or maybe has some ADHD, and those kids are, it's harder to engage them, but with hands-on activities, a lot of times you can pull them back and get them fully engaged. But that dissipates. We see in this graph that dissipates as kids go through their schooling. And by the time a student reaches, 11th grade, you're looking at 32% of kids are engaged, okay, or in a classroom. And it's a problem. And it's, in some ways, it is, in some ways, it's a natural occurrence. I mean, if you go back up on the other side of the scale, when we go into a college setting, right, there's mostly lecture going on. And students are probably at that secondary engagement level where it's sort of more of a high level of compliance, and but less commitment, because they're listening. They're doing a lot of listening. They're taking notes. And I would argue that that's not full engagement. So, and that's sort of the trend of teaching strategies and teaching styles. As we get higher up in the grades, there's a lot more lecture. And I think that the reason for that is that teachers in middle school, teachers in high school, they feel like they have a tremendous amount of content that students need to absorb and that they need to master so that students can move through the grades and then acquire the next content, right? Because we want to base teaching on prior learning. So if we don't get them to a certain point, we can't move them into the next grade, and then they won't be able to access the next level of learning. So it makes a lot of sense to me that this is the trend. And plus, we have developmental stages, right? We have middle school kids who are starting to be social, and they're starting to care less about what the teachers in their lives have to say and the parents in their lives have to say, and that probably peaks in sophomore year. And then 11th grade, they're sort of on the fence, and then I see a little increase in 12th grade. But so part of it's developmental, part of it has to do with the content and the quest of and the goals of teaching at the different grades. That said, it's sort of depressing, right? Because we would all like to be in our flow as much as we can. And when we send kids off to their school day in junior high school and in high school, you hope for your own children that they're in the flow all day, that they're really engaged in their learning, and that they're building their curiosity, and that their learning is inspiring them to take more risks and to research interests on their own. And I think that we need to continue hoping for this. And I think that there's ways to marry all of the needs of the teachers and the students. So what I'm going to suggest today is some solutions that you can try in part to increase engagement for your students. And I'm talking about them under the umbrella of problem or project-based learning. Let me check, make sure we have no questions yet. Feel free to write in. And so I'm going to lay out today sort of 6 ingredients to increase engagement and to engage in a problem or project or inquiry-based approach in your classroom. Now, I am not in the mistaken belief that anyone can just turn around and start doing project-based learning all the time in their classroom, and that we're all going to be living in this beautiful fairyland of engaged 16-year-olds 8 hours a day. I think it's really challenging. And I know it's really challenging. My suggestion is to start a little at a time and don't make any major declarations about the big transitions you're making in your classrooms. But as we go through this webinar, think about the small changes that you can make in a given unit on a given day. So see if you can commit by the end of the webinar to trying a couple of the things that I'm bringing to the table. Okay, it's really hard. Let's look at number one here, a reason to learn. We need to give students a reason to learn. And the reasons to learn, and I'll talk about this in a second, are not always the same for the teacher and the student. But we definitely need to somehow imbue in the students a reason and a purpose for their learning. I think that number two, student choice, is an incredible way to engage students, especially at the secondary level, because they are all about their own agency and learning and wanting to take control over whatever they can in their developing lives. So the more that we can give students choice, the better. I'm an advocate of working on creating a feeling and a community of that values interdependence, and trying to build that interdependence in your classroom through your instructional styles and through the strategies that you use. So, and what I mean by interdependence is working together so that a product is enhanced by the contributions of many. We talk a lot about collaborative learning. Sometimes collaborative learning isn't good for some kids, right? We can't always have collaborative learning. But we can create an atmosphere of interdependence and an atmosphere where students appreciate that it's not just the input from the teacher that's going to make their work good, but it's going to include their peers as well. And we'll talk about that. I think it's very motivating to have students envision at the beginning the product that they're going to create. So I think that adds to engagement, is that they have a goal, they have a product in mind. I think it's very helpful to have an authentic audience when you can have an authentic audience. And I think that in this process, you need to have plenty of formative feedback and self-assessment. And so formative feedback, the role of formative feedback and engagement is a motivator, right? We all know, I mean, think about if you're running a race, let's say, and all those people that come out to that little piddly 5K that you decide to do on a Saturday morning, like on Turkey Day, right? The turkey trot. It means the world to you when you get to a corner and you see your neighbor there and they yell your name, right? And then another, quarter of a mile later, you see your wife or your husband or your partner. And then another quarter of a mile, there's your friend, your best friend, cheering you on. And I think that that's a really big part of this process for kids. I think if we're going to set them up and have them take responsibility for their learning and have them drive their learning, we really need to be there in a very present and consistent way, giving them that feedback, helping them to self-assess. They need that structure. Well, let's see. I have someone let's see. Go down and I have a comment. I personally like project-based learning. How do you manage it in a class of 24 students where 7 to 8 are rebellions? Okay, that's a great question. So that's a really good question. And I think that I hope that by the end of the webinar, I have given you some tools to support you in that process. I will come back to that question at the end of the webinar and see if I can shed any more light. Okay, but I'm going to go through and maybe you will get some answers, and then I will answer it directly. Thank you for the question. Okay, this is a graphic that actually is relevant to that question. Within project-based learning and within any sort of interaction in the classroom. So I have advised many people around project-based learning and having students take ownership. And I have gotten feedback around, our kids couldn't handle it. Okay, they couldn't handle it. And I think a lot of times, if students are given a situation where they can't handle it, they oftentimes will act out or withdraw. So the key here is if you know that you have students who are challenging, this gradual release of responsibility is even slower. And so I want to talk through this a little bit. You see across the top, it says demonstration, shared demonstration, guided practice, independent practice. And then at the bottom it says, I do, you watch, I do, you help, you do, I help, and you do, I watch. Now this is a very simplistic description, but what I want to, the visual really illustrates for me how you start off with a very high level of teacher support, which means a high level of teacher control. And very, very, very slowly, right, you let go of that control and that support as you see students and groups of students mastering the tasks that you're laying out for them. And in project-based learning, and we're going to go through this, basically the whole presentation will be talking about ways to sort of offer that control, to offer that support to students and slowly give them that control. Oh, one more thing about this is that I would suggest at the beginning of trying a project-based model, or trying anything new, or trying anything where you think it's going to challenge kids' executive functioning or their ability to work in a group, that you definitely lower the cognitive load. So always start, when you're starting something new, with content that's very accessible, right? So if you're going to give out reading for them to learn about something, make sure it's at a slightly lower level than you think your students are at. Make it short. So don't have them work in large groups. Have them work in pairs possibly. So however you can, you're going to start out by lowering the rigor a little bit. So let's talk about framing the learning for project-based learning or for engagement in general, right? You want to frame the learning and as a problem that can be solved. And I'm sure, Nisha, that you know about this already. That's the challenge, right? You know what you want your students to learn, but you're going to think of a way to frame it so that it's a challenge or a problem. And I gave you a little example there, right? This is a problem or a challenge. Students are dissatisfied with the school lunches. And so that becomes basically the query or the question or the topic of the learning. Or the next one, it could be a physical project. And so through the creation of a physical project, the students are going to do the learning. And that was just an example about creating a pinball machine. Or the next one talks about frame it in terms of explaining a natural phenomena. And I like this one. How does dog waste impact water quality? And then some people are trying something called Genius Hour, where kids get a period of time during the week to explore their personal interests. And I would suggest if you go about doing that, that you should do a little footwork first and provide them with some controlled resources that they can easily access, or else you might have chaos and rebellion. And this last one is from the Stanford Design School. They work from a paradigm of empathy where they seek out a problem that a group of people or a person is having. They seek out a population and they interview and they figure out, okay, what is this population? How can first we empathize, we fully hear the story of the population, and we hear what their needs are, and then we pose the question to pursue, to solve their problem or meet their needs. So I would say that when students feel that there is a reason when it's their reason, they own the reason. And Nisha, I'm not saying that this is easy, but if you can find the reason for those students, then you've achieved step one. So what is the content that could possibly motivate those students to want to know more? And actually, I'm going to tell a quick story. I had a student when I was teaching high school about, I don't know, 5 years ago maybe. He was a terrible student, and he was a dark person. And I know that he had a lot of, he just came from a lot of trauma. So I was in the position to do an independent project with him. And, this kid didn't come to school very much, but when it came down to it, he wanted to do a research project on serial killers. And I'm not saying that you would do a class project on serial killers. I think that's a very bad idea. But I'm using that as an example of if as much as you possibly can in your class of 20 or 25 or 30 to feel free to accommodate the curiosities, the interests of your students, as long as you can still get at the learning standards, which is our next slide. Okay, so teachers want students to demonstrate mastery of priority learning standards. I am devoted to standards. I think it is a very bad thing for students to go off on projects that are not tied to learning standards, where those standards are assessed, where they're self-reflected upon, where you're giving feedback on these standards. I think that all projects need to be tied to performance standards. So, and the beautiful thing about a project-based model or an inquiry-based model or a problem-based model is that there are huge swaths of standards that are very easily addressed through this model. All of the close reading, writing, listening, and speaking standards, those cross-content literacy standards, they're completely suitable. I mean, they just lend themselves to this kind of work. The math practices, there's 8 math practices in the Math Common Core standards, and I just listed a couple of them there: problem solving, modeling, reasoning. Those are also lend themselves. All the inquiry standards from the next gen standards, and particularly these last two, number 4 and 5, in New Hampshire, almost every school that I'm working with is striving to teach and collect data around some form of habits of work. Many schools have taken the New Hampshire Habits of Work, creativity, communication, collaboration, and self-direction, and expanded them or changed them slightly, and created rubrics. The problem is, we need to give students opportunity in the classroom to learn and practice these standards, to self-assess on these standards, and we need to be able to give them feedback on these standards. So this sort of learning, this inquiry-based learning or project-based learning, really lends itself to opportunities for that to happen. And the same thing with the social emotional skills. And I just listed the SEL skills from CASEL. You can go to CASEL and look more at the individual indicators in each of these competencies. But it's sort of the perfect opportunity. And I generally, I often work in the academic side with groups of teachers. More and more, I'm starting to work around habits of work and social emotional learning skills. And I just am a huge advocate for any school that's trying to implement a social and emotional learning curriculum or social and emotional learning competencies, that this type of teaching, this type of instruction is social emotional learning. Students are learning self-awareness. They're learning self-management when they have to manage their own project, responsible decision-making, relationship skills if they're working in groups. And it's just a question of figuring out how you are providing feedback to students around these. And this is just an example, right, of a rubric, because all of this work, most of the project-based learning will be assessed using rubrics, and rubrics are hard to create. And I'm not saying that this is the ideal, but I just wanted you to see that this could be this was a rubric actually that was used in a project-based learning situation around reducing plastic waste. And these were the standards and proficiencies that were being assessed. And here we have the New Hampshire Habits of Work. This is another rubric that I wanted you to see, where kids were able to use this rubric to self-assess themselves, and a teacher was able to use this rubric to assess students and give feedback. And this is, I just want to say, we all have to accept that kids are not inspired by standards. We have to toe the line there. That's our agenda. Kids want all those things underneath. They want to explore. Kids are curious, and I truly believe that it's the rare student who does not want to learn. It's a question of us figuring out what they want to learn. And they're social. Kids are social in middle school and high school. So we have to figure out how to have them working in social groups that are effective and positive. And I think that they are empathetic, but I'm sort of an idealist, so that's that. But we do have to acknowledge that the reasons that kids want to learn are different from the reasons that we want them to learn. So when we talk about choice, this was number 2 on my list. These are some different ways to provide choice, right? We can definitely differentiate content. We can have students differentiate the product. We can have them differentiate the method, who they work with, and who their audience will be. So I think that the hardest, most unmanageable thing, or least, no, I don't want to say it's unmanageable because it's not unmanageable, but I think that it's definitely the most challenging is managing different content. So it takes a lot of front loading, I think. If you are going to allow students to choose content, I think that the route that I would go would not be to have that. Well, I'm going to talk about this more. I don't want to get ahead of my slides, but certainly content is very hard to differentiate, but doable under certain conditions. And product, I think, is getting easier to differentiate because the kids know the technology better than we do, and they can also teach each other. And I think methods pretty reasonable, and partners should be pretty easy. Same with audience. So I would change or differentiate not more than 1 or 2 of these variables when I'm starting to do something like project-based learning. And I would say that even high school students can't manage the blank page, right? We cannot set them off into working independently because I don't believe that most students have had the experience of guiding their own learning and taking control of their own learning. I think that for most students, they are accustomed to the teacher being the authority, the teacher having the answers, and that they believe it's the teacher's job, right, to provide the answers, as opposed to them seeking answers themselves. And again, to bring it back to my own 2 17-year-olds in my house who were excellent students, even excellent in terms of grades, and they're excellent learners outside of school. I'm not sure how well they're doing in school, which is frustrating in terms of curiosity and engagement. But they have come back to me when their teachers have tried to do project-based learning and questioned the role of the teacher versus the role of the student. So I really think this is new for many kids. And the line in the middle with the sort of orange arrows, it's a continuum, right? And so we have to do that slowly. We go from teacher managed and then controlled choice and then to student managed. So we just have to do that very, very carefully. And I think that as a teacher, it is essential that you work from your own abilities and your own personality, right? It's an ecosystem. Your classroom is an ecosystem. And you don't want to be following someone else's directive and wind up in a situation that's unmanageable for you. So you have to decide what your executive functioning is, right? The level of control that you need in your classroom while still doing what's best for students. So you challenge yourself, even if you're a person that needs a high level of control, the expectation that is, as a teacher, you're going to challenge yourself to push that if you know what's best for students. But you truly need to push it at a rate that's manageable for you. Oops. Okay. So, and I'm going to just tie that back to 1 second to Nisha's question. Whoop, she's got a great, here she goes again. Terrific. Okay, so Nisha's talking about, I have a comment in, that when we're letting kids choose their partners, right? Sometimes they'll choose their friends and then nothing gets done. And then what Nisha's also saying is when she assigns partners, they're not happy or they resent the new group. So and most of the students okay. So I'm going to address Nisha's question. I think it's a good one. I have an idea that I'm actually stealing from my own children's experience. Their teachers, and maybe you've tried this, I don't know, but their teachers have, prior to a project, they've had the students list 3 students that they would like to work with, and any students that they absolutely feel they cannot work with. So in that sense, even if you wind up putting a student with one of the kids they want to work with, and then a kid that's, randomly chosen, then at least the student feels like he or she has had choice. So I would suggest that as a possible thing to try. And then with regard to students not liking the content, I have also worked with a chemistry teacher who she started introducing her content with human stories that were related to the topics that the class had to cover. And she found that it was tremendously engaging. So if you want to find out more about that, Nisha, then you should send me an email and I can actually connect you with that teacher. All right. But she really had a lot of success from that. Okay. Let's keep going. So I just want to point out that interdependence will build engagement because students develop relationships in their classroom, the right kind of relationships that are based on the idea that there's mutual learning going on. And I want to also point out that not all kids are equipped to work in collaborative groups. I would posit that most kids are not equipped, so that and even in high school, I'm going to go back to that for a second. They don't know how to do it. You can't set them out into collaborative groups because they don't know how to organize. They don't know how to dialogue. And I'm going to get into that in a second. But I would suggest pairs as a manageable way to have students working together, small groups. And I would also say for some kids, another choice that they can have is, you can work alone, but you need to organize periodic consultations. So part of your strategic plan in your project, right, has you talking with another student or another group that is working on a similar topic. And that has to do, and I want to go back to this idea of if you're going to vary the content, I would definitely start with giving them choice as opposed to open-ended. Right? So if you're doing a unit, on the human body, right? And this is obvious. I think everyone on the webinar must know this already, that, you might have them differentiate by giving them the capacity or the permission to choose their system, Okay, so just as an example of what I'm saying. And that way, you're a little bit in control. You can help them access information more easily. You can cull information for them. You'll definitely have more than one student working on a similar topic, and so on. All right. Okay, I'm going to give you a bunch of protocols now. Some of them are attached. And again, I encourage you to go back to our website because there's tons of stuff included there. We have to help them. We have to scaffold for them. And this is done using protocols, dialogue norms. I didn't put this in here, but also there's text norms. So there's things like text protocols where students are given a protocol to read for specific information or for specific tasks. And then this is the thing, you're going to model. You can't even just give them the protocol and tell them to do it, even if they're in 11th grade. You have to do it up with the class first so that they know exactly what they're doing. And the same thing with protocols for creating common understanding or making meaning together. This is something I stole from a guy named AJ Giuliani, and you can find out all about him. He's a bigwig, getting bigger. He seems like a nice guy, so I haven't met him, but I've listened to some of his stuff and watched his webinar. He's up and coming. He's young. He's got lovely kids. He's inspired, and I liked this little thing that he presented. It was called the discussion game, and I actually feel like it would be even okay in high school, definitely in middle school, definitely 3 to 5. So when the kids come into the classroom, you give them a colored card, 4 colored cards, each of which are listed above, right? So the pink card is an I feel card, the green card is an I think card, the blue and the yellow is I know, and then the red is a question, and they get points for contributing to the conversation, right? Each card can be played only once. You have to raise your hand. Maybe you don't. Depends. You don't have to raise your hand. Maybe you're doing a Harkness circle. Who knows? Or some other format where they don't have to raise their hand. And then the red one can be used, I guess, repeatedly. And you always have to justify your I know comments, right? So this is just a little protocol that you can use to get kids used to talking and to get them to make a game out of it. And to give them sentence starters, right? So it gives them a purpose around the conversation. You might put up a topic, you might put up an image, you might do a quick introduction to a given topic. And it's a super easy and not scary way to make that happen. Fishbowl, I didn't include any handouts on Fishbowl because all you got to do is Google it. This is this is the oldest one in the book. 4 kids go in the middle and they carry on a conversation, or they carry on, they use some sort of protocol, or they're given a topic, and they have a dialogue. And then the students in the outside observe their dialogue and formulate questions. And if you want to, there's a lot of different fun things you can do with this. You can have the students at the outside formulate questions. You can have the students on the outside provide feedback to students in the center on their dialogue, right? How well they reflected back with phrases like, I hear what you're saying, or I liked what so-and-so said. I'd like to add to that. Like you could put up dialogue rules or sentence stems and have the students in the outside observe for the students using those sentence stems or their rules. There's all sorts of goodies that you can use with the Fishbowl. And I would encourage you to just look up the protocol. It's super easy. Okay, so here's a bunch of protocols for developing understanding and exploring intellectually together. And I'm just going to run through these. And these are all from the Harvard Project Zero. This is the top of the piece of paper. The 2 of them are connected to the webinar, and then the rest are on our website. But you can also just Google them. See, Think, Wonder, and this is a routine for exploring works of art or other interesting things. Okay, so it's very open-ended. You could use this with anything across all disciplines. And all it does is it gives kids a start, right? It scaffolds the conversation. It gives kids so that the conversation or the dialogue sort of stays targeted, but it also gives kids that are reluctant to speak a way to start. And here's one that it's for a little bit deeper. Okay, so what do you think you know about this topic? What questions or puzzles do you have about this topic? And what more does this topic make you want to explore? Here's another. This is for propositions, right? So you could come in with a proposal or a viewpoint or an idea, and as a group, right, a small group, if they were working on a specific proposal, if they were at the start of a problem-based learning situation, what excites you about this idea? What's the upside? What do you find worrisome? This is also good for, honestly, this is what, I don't know if anyone on the webinar is in a position of working with staff. It's a great protocol. I've used it with adults when we are doing staff development. What do you find worrisome about this idea or the proposition? What's the downside? And what do we need to know to find out about more? Okay, what additional information will help us? And there's one more. And this has to do with viewpoints, right? A routine for exploring different perspectives. Brainstorm a list of different perspectives and then use this script skeleton to explore each one. And I don't have the full document here. But that encourages, I mean, we're all working on viewpoint, whether it's in science or in English or in health. Think about the topic from this viewpoint or think about it from a different viewpoint and sort of experimenting with that can be a lot of fun and super fun for kids. This I'm going to go through fairly quickly. This is the question formulation technique, and we are actually from the Right Question Institute, and they too work out of Harvard, and they will have another webinar, I think it's May 23rd, focused only on the QFT. And I have uploaded into our site it's probably about 10 pages description of the process. But it's basically getting kids. I don't believe that kids know how to ask questions. They're not comfortable asking questions all the time. They're not always encouraged and give the space. I think to be in a situation where kids are trained in small groups to brainstorm questions together and where rules are provided about how every kind of question is acceptable, and teaching them how to categorize those questions into closed-ended questions, into open-ended questions, categorize questions by depth of knowledge, and what the kinds of information, the kinds of answers they might get in response to those questions. I think that's an amazing activity for a group of students. And this question formulation technique, if you train your students to do it, will open up an incredible amount of dialogue and exploration for your students, either whole class or in small groups. So, and the protocol is super easy. I want to say again that these protocols are easy, but the kids still can't do them without direct instruction. Repeated direct instruction in tiny little slices if necessary, so that maybe one day you just come in with a question focus and you stop at step 3 with your kids. Like, we're just going to sit and we're going to produce dozens of questions, and then you're going to stop and you're going to move on and then pick it up the next day. So we really can be, you can't be too granular sometimes in it. You have to judge your class and what they can bite off. This is a document that I've seen teams use where it just sets out the expectations. And going back to that behavior issue, This also, time has to be spent on this, right? What do these sentences mean? We promise to listen to each other's ideas with respect. And I would actually choose and model each of these, like make it a focus for a day. And then throughout the course of the day or throughout the course of the block, be sure that that's the one thing as a teacher that you're going to keep coming back to. Like, that student just modeled this. That student didn't model this. And pick one thing. It's a very slow transformation to train your students how to take responsibility within teams and responsibility for their learning. So this is a great contract, and I would encourage you to use it if you do jump off the project-based learning. I'm not going to say cliff. I'm going to say curb. I don't think products are a problem. I think that we all understand that there's dozens and dozens. The key is not to let your students choose a product that doesn't align with the learning goals. And so when you're conferencing with students, right, you need to reflect, make sure that you conference with them and reflect back about the questions or the concerns that you have if you have concerns about a product that it doesn't align with learning goals. This is a sample of a project design template. And I think this is a teacher-facing document right here. This is the document that you would create if you were planning a project or inquiry-based adventure for your kids. I do think that and there are templates that we'll look at in a few minutes that are sort of clearer, simpler versions of this, because your students will need a project planning template of their own if they are going to plan out their learning tasks. So this is just, and I wanted you to know that this was here and to point out that the content is outlined, the 21st century competencies, and in New Hampshire, that's our habits of work, a project summary, the way that you frame the content very often is through a driving question. So you might come in and start this adventure with a driving question. And this one on here is, how can we as medical interns recommend the best treatment for a sick patient? But going back to the slide, because we're not medical interns, but going back to the slide that we had before, what is the impact of waste? What is the impact of dog waste in our community, at our community beaches, let's say? I'm just going to mute for 1 second. Okay, I'm back. So this is a template or something that you can create easily in Doc or in a Word doc or in Excel. Just for students, it's very simple. Once they've embarked on a learning experience, and I want to go back and repeat that if you're going to have students embark on their own learning experience, I would keep it short at the beginning, right? You don't want to have, from your very first time out the gate, you don't want them to be doing a 3-week project. Maybe you do it in the course of a week or even 2 days, some sort of design sprint, just a little at a time. So you're going to talk with them and plan with them and help them. What will you learn? What will you make? And take them through each part of the template. What's the timeline? What are your goals? What resources do you have? What do you need? And help them to anticipate the barriers and to indicate, the steps that they've completed or not completed together as a group. They're working as a group. And the audience, right? We need to help them find the audience that will appreciate. And this has gotten a lot easier because we have so many virtual outlets. So controlled websites, YouTube, iTunes, Vimeo, podcasts, right? Kids are just chomping at the bit to interact with that technology. And it's a good thing that we have it because it's incredibly engaging and motivating for kids. So there's the gradual release again. I have been emphasizing it throughout, but here it is again. I can't emphasize it enough. For all grade levels, they all need it. We need it, right? I mean, your partner would never walk out of the room and throw the television controls to you and say, deal with it. If you didn't know how to work the television, as I don't. We don't have one. But when I go to other people's houses, right? You're going to sit there and you're going to be a support. Your partner's going to be a support for you. They're going to teach you how to do it a little at a time. That was probably not the best example, but it was the first thing that came to mind. So that's what we do, little at a time, even as adults. This is what I've been saying. So start your project short at first, less complex content, less independence at the beginning. Okay, decide where you're headed, definitely, but start with just 1 or 2 independent variables there. Couple of choice things, high structure, frequent conferencing, constant ongoing formative feedback, and help them to self-assess. And so these next slides are going to talk to you a little bit about structuring this process. There's lots of structures out there, and I'm going to quickly go through some of them. The key is not what the specific structure is. The key is being consistent in the structure. And if you're doing this in your building, it would be very good for your students to be able to go from class to class to class, hearing the familiar language of the work, right? So if you're going to use the Stanford School of Design ideation process, that's great. You're going to start with empathizing. They're going to define the problem. They're going to ideate or ideate. I never know which. They're going to create a prototype. They're going to test the prototype. They're going to fail. They're going to take that feedback. They're going to leverage that feedback and go back to ideate again and create a prototype again. Okay, so it's this cycle. This is the classic inquiry. This is nice for teachers and students because it really takes them through all of the questions, right? So this is not just for science or for math. This is for project-based learning, right? Oh, here's another one. This is A.J. Giuliani's cute visual on the launch cycle. He wrote a whole book. Look, listen, and learn. Ask tons of questions to understand the process or the problem. Navigate ideas. Come up with ideas. Create a prototype. Fail. It's part of the project. Highlight what you're going to fix, and then relaunch. And then fail again. And finally, when you're done failing and you've succeeded, you can launch to an audience. So, we're running out of time. Okay, I'm going to stay on till 4. I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but I think this is going to go till 4:20. So, some things about feedback. If we want our students to be able to invest in this process as learners and to be engaged in the process, we can't emphasize the product over the process. We have to emphasize and value the process as much so that we have to give feedback on the procedural elements of the project, because this is about the learning, right? And shifting kids to think not about failure, but about failing, and how when you fail, you use that information to restart again. And, I can go on about growth mindset. We have webinars and resources on that too. It's essential for this. We have to grow that in students. And it's not, you're going to go into this, the kids don't have a growth mindset, right? First of all, teenagers are terrified of failure, worse in middle school. And because they may or may not have been encouraged in their lives, thus, before, to have a growth mindset, that's something that has to be cultivated in your classroom with this process. And just to, the bottom bullet just talks about how our assessments have to focus on the process. I like this slide. This is from AJ Giuliani's webinar, actually, and it talked about different types of student conferences. And I liked this because on the left-hand side, it talks about the focus of the conference, the teacher's role, and the student's role, right? So you're not always going to conference with your kids and treat it like a checkup, that you're monitoring them. You make the shift, right, to the kind of conference where a student sets up a conference or a team sets up a conference with you to get targeted help, where they actually ask you questions and it's your job to answer them. But it's directed by them. They come with the questions. It's not you asking the questions. It's you come to me with your questions and I am here to support you. So I liked that. That is it's just a powerful place for kids to be, right? You're not going and grilling them to make sure they're doing it right? They're coming to you as a resource. So going to the next over, right? The reflection, that's when the teacher asks questions, encouraging the students to self-reflect on their process and their product. And so it's almost like being a therapist, right? You ask probing questions that the students answer, and hopefully, if you're crafty or craftful and skillful in this, and you will get better at this, they will come to their own conclusions. And then the last kind of conference where it's reciprocal and you are both asking and answering questions. So I'm going to breeze through these, but this is a student agency rubric from the New Tech Network. I don't know if you remember New Tech High. Anyway, if you want to talk more about this, I'm happy to. But you can look at New Tech Network, and this is a rubric for kids that allows them to. This is teacher facing, but you can change this into a student-facing rubric. I mean, at high school, this could easily be a student-facing rubric, where it allows them to be assessed or to self-assess, right? Their effort, how well they seek challenges, how well they grow from setbacks, and how their confidence grows. So I like this, and it is in the resources. And this is a grit rubric. It does a similar thing. This has to do with, this is definitely student-facing for high school. And it allows kids to give themselves or self-assess themselves around being bold and risk-taking, being reflective and persistent. So I wanted to share those tools with you. I want to talk about this for a second. So this is all about how to give peer feedback. And so this is basically a directive for kids. And I think we so rarely teach kids to this level of detail how to give and receive feedback. So I just feel that this is a fabulous tool. And then it even gives you the time on the left-hand side for each phase. So it names the phase, it gives you the time, it describes the phase, and then tells the student precisely, the pair, let's say, or the group, what everybody's roles are. Another way to leverage peer feedback is through a gallery walk, and this structures the gallery walk for each project or each presentation, right? A student can walk through, title the presentation, and write down as they go, right? Something that I like, a question that I have, and then have you considered? Just another structure for peer feedback. And we're almost, Todd, this is it. This is our last slide. And what I want to emphasize to you is, this made me laugh. I was thinking about guides and to be a guide on the ride as opposed to the sage on the stage. And so there's Gandalf on the right-hand side, who is a fearless guide in, oh my God, Kings, Lord of the Rings. Whoa, I had a moment. And there's Miss Frizzle from the science books when we were, whatever, grades 3 to 6 or grades 2 to 6. And to me, these two personalities, they really embody what it means to be the guide on the ride. And so I would encourage you all to channel your inner Gandalf and your inner Ms. Frizzle when you're thinking about creating engaging activities and engaging projects for your students. Please know that here are some resources that I took some of our resources from. I didn't include some of the stuff from Harvard in the resources, and I apologize for that. But they're on the slides, and the slides are uploaded to our site, so you can access them. You can also email me. I'd love it. Email me or call. My phone number is also on our site, and I'd love to talk with you about this further. So I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and take care. Have a great night. I will stay on for a minute or two in case there are any more questions. Okay, I guess there are no more questions. Take good care, and if you have any trouble getting any of the resources, just shoot me an email. And Nisha, I will try to connect you to the teacher that I was talking about. So, and I have your email from the registration. You're welcome, everyone. Be well.